Okay, it's coming, it's coming.
In light of transparency, before that sort of comes, I just want to say that we haven't pre-registered this study, but we are sharing the full data. And right now on the website, you can see all the studies that we've been included. We're preparing all the tools that these studies have used, so you can have access to them. And I would kindly ask, if we've missed any studies, that you go through that list and alert us to that, so we can add them to the list. In 2002, first systematic review on peer review was published. And it said that effects of peer review are uncertain. It's been 20 years since then, and peer review remains a black box. We know very little about it, and we haven't really discovered what it actually does. And that's why we wanted to head on the study to see what the studies show that it does. We included so far in our analysis 29 studies, 12 of which 12 have been published in 2022. I'm not including those in the analysis here, but we're adding them every day. And I've seen in these conferences an additional 4 have been done. So we'll add those as well. But on average, a median number of analyzed pairs, so between a submitted or a published paper or between a preprint and published paper, has been analysis of around 67 manuscripts, with a range from 10 to almost 14,000 manuscripts being analyzed in a single paper. Majority of those have looked at submitted papers, and that majority of 62% is actually how many have done these studies in biomedical sciences. So we're coming back more that this is now more biomedical approach of looking at what peer review does. All but 4 studies have used different methods. And so they've measured 150 and more different outcomes, and it is almost impossible to merge them and give you a great quantitative, point estimates of what peer review actually does, but I'll give a little estimates what they are. First, we did a sort of qualitative analysis of that. And not to use my own words and interpret what I think they find, I wanted to show you here their own conclusions, minimized in 2 or 3 words of what they've done. Majority of the studies said very little changes during peer review. 4 studies specifically done by the same group of researchers in social sciences says that the biggest thing that changes in social sciences is the theory sections of papers. I have to also point out that this was always just a subsection of social sciences based on organizational studies in social sciences. 2 studies concluded that it had too small sample size to be able to generalize any results of what peer review does. And 6 said that there was some indication that certain parts are improved. What those parts are were most commonly introduction and discussion sections, or a little bit of clarity and readability. I have to also say that at current stage, we did not include, because the review included mostly studies that looked only at readability. We wanted to know actually what changes in the content or the main methods of results. So the studies that looked at exclusively readability and exclusively at references, we are adding them to our list, but we haven't meta-analyzed them yet. I'll show you here only the meta-analysis of 2 things that were also pointed out by reviewers of this conference, and that is what changes in results. And only 4 studies had this outcome as a measurement, and around 30%, and they say that around 30% of manuscripts have at least 1 outcome change, or at least something added in the results. But of those, around 10%, and if I include the 4 studies that were presented now here at conference, the percentage comes to lower than 10%, around 5%, only changed the direction of results a little bit effect. The problem is, again, that I group these for you. I'm not sure we're going to actually group this the way when we publish the paper, because they haven't used the same questions. Some say, has the p-value changed? Others say, has the effect size changed by maybe 5% or 10%? So it isn't always the same question that is asked, but it's sort of aiming to how significant that question is. I also want to remind that even though the significance may change, or the effect size might change, we've seen even here a lot of studies, most studies that always have some positive effects. The fact that a study has found that effect doesn't mean that that effect actually translates to clinical work. And when we think of all the research that have been presented even here at this conference, how many of the studies have you heard today or yesterday that will actually change the practices of how we do peer review or publishing? So we've heard phenomenal studies, but that does not mean, and even the studies that are published that are positive, that will have an effect. So even if the change or the effect of the study changes in these 10% or less, that does not mean that will actually have an effect on real life. Being in a meta-research group, I was also very curious to know how many of these papers analyze themselves. And we have seen that acknowledgement sections of these 29 papers, only 20% thanked their reviewers for contribution to their own papers, and only one paper said that thanks to the peer reviews, something significantly improved. But it didn't say what it improved, nor did they use the same method that they used to analyze papers to analyze their own study. So I think we should always reflect on, if we're thinking that peer review does something, I would also call on you, especially those who have published maybe 50 or 60 or 70 articles, why don't you write an article about that, how much your own papers changed because of peer review. There's so many limitations of these studies, including the analysis that we've done. First, majority of these are concerned only with the papers that are later published. So we don't know what's the effect of peer review on those that are rejected. However, a lot of studies have also indicated that if you're not published in one journal, just go to the other one. And one of these studies actually followed the papers that were rejected in their journal and then published later on in other journals. We cannot always clearly differentiate what peer review actually means. Is it what the authors have done on their own because they realized the mistake? Is it because the reviewers said the mistake? Is it because the author said the mistake? Was it copy editor? Differentiating these levels of what changes because of who is also not done in these studies. It's very hard to look at the changes based on the initial quality of the paper itself. In the 1994, the Goodman study, they also said that we've seen a bigger effect for studies that initially came over poor quality. And we know that working in a journal that is of a medium quality, we help a lot of journals that need more help. But we know that desk rejections does a lot of work, and that is not, again, captured in these studies. Number of reviews is more likely, the more review rounds you go through, that the paper will change more. But again, all of the studies that included didn't show that much changes at all, no matter the round of reviews. Journal and value representatives, yes, we have 29 or we have 40 studies here, but do we believe even with a 10,000 sample that this is representative for the whole population? I've shown you that the majority of these studies come from biomedicine, that we trust that it applies to finance and other research that we hear here. In social sciences, only 4 studies. So there's a lot of work yet to be done. And again, tool reliability of this or inter-rater reliability, how we measure if something changed, is very tricky because majority of these come from, let's say, us meta-researchers who look at what has changed after the peer review. And then we say the peer review was wrong and they should have collected this. Not to mention that a lot of studies we know report so many studies don't report this, so many studies don't report this. And if we take those into account, we could say that peer review doesn't do these things, but that would require meaning that peer reviewers were actually asked to comment on this section, and that was their role. And we know that that isn't happening. So I would like to urge you here to try and change these last 20 years, that when we meet again in 4 or 5 years, that the situation is not the same. Please, if you are a publisher, allow your authors to enable them to either post these manuscripts as the ones that submit either as a preprint, or you publish their submitted manuscripts, so that the analysis of changes between the submitted manuscripts and published can tell us what's happening to peer review. Consider switching to open peer review. Maybe one of the reasons why we don't know what peer review does is because less than 1% of journals today operate on open peer review, so we cannot know what actually it does. Consider publishing peer review statements. If your journal has conflict of interest statement or statement of data availability, why don't you have a peer review statement where you say what has changed because of peer review? When we presented this previously, we always heard the authors would like to know what changes. And going back to register reports, and a comment that was done before, if a significant thing is changed during the design in a register report, who is there the author? We have to discuss about this. When is the contribution of a review really important for the study that is being presented? And finally, as a researchers, let's agree on the core outcomes. How can we have these 40 studies and none of them measuring the same thing? Can we agree that all should at least maybe report the number of words before and after? Has the methods changed? Has the results changed in the same way, so that we can get a point estimates of what does peer review actually do? And I would like to also say something, 2 more things, if this will work. In order that we can quantify what changes, we need to ask peer reviewers specifically to comment on specific things. So I'm happy to announce that Elsevier has launched a pilot that we helped to design questions on 250 journals that is now being run, where we implemented structured peer review questions that reviewers have to answer. They don't have to provide a standard review that we commonly used to, open free text, but they have to ask specific questions. And then if we have these questions, then we can actually say what changed because of peer review. And In light of that, also, I would like to point out, maybe you have heard the news that Elsevier has published for the first time, it will publish an open database on peer review that we can actually analyze it. One of the problems of analyzing peer review is we don't have data to that. And I'm happy to announce that the peer review workbench is coming out there and that we'll get data sets and allow researchers to research something else. In light of this, may I make a little bit of a bold statement, the last one. Don't come up here and tell us how different things are in your, in your fields and the ones we haven't discovered. We need data for this. And if you're a publisher or a researcher and you have data on how your manuscripts has changed, please contact us. We have teams that will work on this. We really need to know what is happening with peer review if we want to improve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. I see questions are arriving, so we start with the one here in front.
So Alessandro Villar, American Physical Society. So I have a confession to make. I'm a physicist. So, we come from a different community, and many of the things I see when people are judging bias or changes in the conference involve also baseline. And this is a question that I don't see very much addressed. So if you're looking at what peer review does, my hunch is that it exists so people have an expectation that it's going to be peer reviewed, and this is already changing what they write. So I think that if you want to really know what it does, you have to compare to a baseline that comes from a community that does not use peer review. For instance, I don't know, if you compare papers to news in the newspaper, for instance, that they are not peer reviewed. So something like this, that you have a baseline which you can say, yeah, I trust this. This is the effect of the process peer review in the community. So this is something I miss sometimes. I don't know if you have a comment on this.
Thank you. I agree with that. And I haven't mentioned that a peer review has an enormous effect on maybe us as researchers and even our life effect. But again, reminding you of this is a study of how the manuscript changes. So this is a quantification of what does peer review do to the manuscript, not what it does to us or what it does to the community or anything else.
Okay, Vivian?
Yeah, I'm exhausted. I really try to follow you.
Sorry.
Next time, take it slower, please. I mean, there was so much there. I just want to say about your slide on what can we do? And you provide here some, I think it's sort of like an example of how we could be more transparent as to what was done. And you say description of changes. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to point out that most journals don't actually provide much information about what kind of peer review. Maybe they'll describe the type of peer review they have in the journal, the model, but not specifically at the article level. So I think that's one thing that still is pending in our industry, to be more exact and accurate about how many peer reviewers actually participated in the peer review of that specific article. And I do appreciate you suggesting that the names should be provided. And then the typical history of okay. And then you say description of changes, but I think that's totally impractical because especially when we accompany our authors, as we do in our journal, we have many different rounds of peer review. Not all of the same peer reviewers are present in each one of these rounds, and many, many things change. So I think it's not very practical to have a kind of credit taxonomy for description of changes. That's my opinion. Please comment.
I think, like everything else, we need to test that. If it doesn't take a lot of time, and if we do develop a taxonomy, why not use it? Why not say, shouldn't the authors the readers know that a method or a result has changed during the peer review? Don't we have a right to know what has happened in this research? And especially if we want to design intervention studies, or if we want to design education to educate authors on what are the most common mistakes that are found in papers and what have they been improved, we need this information. So the practicality of it is, I think, is as difficult as implementing ORCID IDs or as implementing credit taxonomy. It is not easy, but it can be done. And with the automated machines and everything else, we're moving towards that direction. We shouldn't be stuck on the old paradigms that we've been using for the last centuries.
Okay, Michael, with the virtual audience questions.
D. Peter Online, who's editor of the CDC journal Emerging Infectious Diseases, wonders, beyond credit taxonomy, if there are other creative suggestions for ways to thank or recognize peer reviewers that journals can operationalize.
I mean, I think we all know here that there isn't one. Each big publishers has their own ways of trying to reward them, but we've seen huge differences. We know the majority of disciplines don't even pay them. It's of enough, contracts told when you work in university, are you supposed to review or not? How many are you supposed to review? So I think there's a lot of work that we want to do. If we want to do it, we often look at as a parallel on grant review. Majority of grant reviewers pay their reviewers. If we want to expect a certain quality of review to be done, maybe we need considering payment or some other, sort of aspects. If I want to ask them the structured questions that we're asking them right now, 20 of them, and having them answer, or the quality review that was presented before me of the 37 questions, and if a reviewer is supposed to fill that out, how long does that take? And what gives me the right as an editor to ask you to do that for nothing? I mean, what is that? But when I do ask those questions, I know what I get. When I don't, and I've been a reviewer now for 3.5 years, I'm very disappointed when I get only comments on introduction and discussion. I don't need you to do that. I can do that. I need you to confirm the rigor of the science and to tell me, do you trust the findings? But even as reviewers, we're often hard. We don't want to publicly say that. It is hard. We've seen that maybe even in public trials of should the COVID vaccine be implemented, you had 70 doctors in an NIH publicly live stream saying, do they think it should be given to the population? And then of those 17, 15 said yes, 2 did not, but that was a public live thing. If we implemented that, the same thing as we do of Supreme Court judges and we do review, I think it would be different. So we need to know when we ask someone and how we reward them, but it isn't easy.
Thank you. I know some editors who have taken it upon themselves to write letters to promotion committees for their highest ranked peer reviewers. Just a comment. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. We have time for maybe 2 questions, but we'll see if they are quick and the answers are also brief. We go with the one here. in front.
Quick comment and question. Comment is regarding the last point you mentioned in computer science. We have this platform called openreview.net, which is really amazing. Like you have all submitted papers online, both accepted and rejected, all their versions, all their reviews, the consensus statement, the decision, everything. So it's an amazing data set if anyone wants to use openreview.net. My question is about the point you mentioned, asking journals to allow preprints. In my community, like some venues don't allow preprints in order to help make double blind better. What are the reasons that these journals don't allow preprints? Is it the same or something else?
I think there's many reasons why they don't allow preprints. So I'll skip that one and we can discuss that on lunch for a very long time. But I hope that they will stop doing that.
Okay, quick question from there in the back.
Dan Ivanko, AACR. I'm always shocked when I see the results of all these studies showing no, beneficial effect of peer review, because my anecdotal experience as an editor for many years was that many manuscripts are improved a lot and changed a lot in the course of peer review. And one of my concerns is so many of these studies are based on preprints, what's in the preprint, and then so many preprints actually don't get published. So you're missing that comparison. You touched on that. And I really liked your suggestion that basically all things that are submitted to journals and published go into a preprint archive first, because I think that's the only way to get a full comparison and do a proper study, because I think we're missing too much of the sample set right now.
I think we all have experiences, but please give us the data.
Yeah, okay, but we have 5,000 research as post-publication peer review. So one last question, quick. There from the back.
Damien Pattinson from eLife. Thanks, that was great. And I completely echo all your sentiments around recommendations. I would also recommend that publishers sign up to publish your reviews, the work that's been going on from ASAP Bio, which is encouraging reviewers to put their reviews online alongside the preprints. My question, I guess, related to what was said a minute ago, there does seem to be at odds with the kind of surveys that we all do as publishers to the authors. And really, the primary reason that people, authors value peer review is because of it improving the manuscript. So that's sort of at odds with what you're showing. So what do you think?
Okay, quick answer.
There was one study that said that authors often address comments by reviewers because they fear that otherwise they won't be published, but then that they always agree with what the reviews ask. So I'll keep it with that.
Okay, thanks, great. Keeping to time. Thanks, Mario. Okay.